You're tuned into the Spot Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. And welcome back to another episode of the Spot Up Pod. Before I begin discussing the San Antonio Spurs and all the topics I have in line for this episode, I do want to talk about what's going on right now in Los Angeles. So as you know, the Spurs had their Saturday game canceled against the Lakers in LA due to the wildfires that are ongoing right now in Los Angeles. So I kind of want to catch up with what's going on right now in LA and just the latest updates. So on Saturday, the NBA announced that Friday evening, the NBA announced that the January 11th game between the Spurs and Lakers will be postponed and rescheduled at a later date due to the wildfires in LA. I do encourage you to visit cares.nba.com/wildfire-relief-efforts, and I will put this link in the description, both for the podcast and the video. That's where you can, if you'd like to, you can donate to all of those different organizations that are helping people that have lost their homes. So Monday's game is going to take place. It's word coming out of different media outlets that game will not be canceled. It will go forward on Monday. So the Spurs and Lakers will play on Monday. The Spurs, they remained in LA during all of this, so they have been practicing. They got a few practices in this past week. This actually impacted Chris Paul, his family on Tuesday. They had to evacuate their home, according to Jeff McDonald of the San Antonio Express News. And then Spurs CEO R.C. Buford released a statement basically saying how the Spurs fully supported the NBA's decision to postpone the game on Saturday, and also that their thoughts are with all the families impacted by the fire. So again, that's the latest on what's going on with the wildfires. But the Spurs Lakers game will actually go forward on Monday. All right, so now we do got to talk about the Spurs here and how the week has been going for them. So before this game got canceled on Saturday, let's talk about their two games they played this past week, which was both not good situations for them. It was Monday. They were on the road at Chicago, January 6th. The Spurs were favored by 3 points. They led for most of this game. They led it by as many as 19 points in the third quarter. Then going into the fourth quarter, they were up by 13 points. But then, just like what happened a few games ago against the Denver Nuggets, their offense went cold again in the fourth. They were only able to score 15 points, and then they had trouble on defense stopping some of the Bulls-specific players. Zach LaVine, Kobe White, Nikola Vucevic all got going there in the fourth, and so the Bulls rallied back from a 19-point deficit, and they beat the Spurs by 4 points. Wemby ended up with 23 points, though not as efficient a shooting night with 22 shots. He still collected 14 rebounds and had 8 blocks in the game. Chris Paul was behind Wemby there with 18 points and 9 assists in that game against Chicago. So again, that was the first loss of the week on Monday. Then we go to Wednesday, January 8th. The Spurs are still on the road. They're on the road at Milwaukee. I do want to say the Bucks were favored by 5 points in this game, but this one really wasn't close. After the first quarter, in the second quarter, the Bucks took control here, where they held the Spurs to 15 points in that second quarter, and they grew a big double-digit lead. In the third quarter, the Spurs did fight back. They got within 8 of the Bucks, but then in the fourth, Milwaukee got going again, got a double-digit lead. They basically led by as many as 26 points, the Bucks did. And so they ended up winning by 16 points, where it wasn't really close at all in the fourth. And so, Spurs starters left the game pretty early. Keldon Johnson led the Spurs in scoring with 24 points on 15 shots. He also had 11 rebounds for a double-double. But I do want to say some of his numbers did come in the fourth quarter when, again, it was like a 20-plus point game. Chris Paul, again, was more aggressive trying to shoot the basketball here. So he ends up with 18 points on 10 shots. He's been looking for a shot a little bit more now. Also 7 assists. And then the Bucks really their game plan was originally in the first quarter, they kind of had different defenders guarding Wemby, but then Giannis would kind of shade over and provide some help. Then in the second quarter onward, they completely just went to straight up Giannis on Wemby. And then anytime the Spurs got a switch where they got Giannis off of Wemby, Giannis was always that help defender. He wasn't really sticking on players from the Spurs players from three, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And he was, again, there to apply that double team pressure for Wemby. So Wemby can never get into rhythm. The Spurs lack spacing. And so, when your best player can't get going, it's tough for the rest of the players to get going. And so the Spurs did lose that game to Milwaukee. Again, it wasn't really close. And then just something I mentioned is that, they have lost the last 3 games against Denver, against Chicago, against Milwaukee. And one thing I've seen when you look at the data and also the eye test matches this is that they are having to just shoot a lot more threes right now. A larger percentage of their shots are coming from 3. And the defense is really taking away the paint, the inside scoring areas for the Spurs, which means that, again, part of it is that it's actually more deliberate, where the defense is actually letting the Spurs take a lot of wide open threes. Over half the Spurs' shots in these last 3 games have not shots. Half of the Spurs' threes have been wide open according to the data. So again, that's something deliberate by the defense, that they really want to cramp in the spacing around Victor on the inside. And now the Spurs don't, as I'm going to talk about a little bit later, the Spurs don't have a lot of accurate shooters right now on catch and shoot threes, and so that's been a big problem. And again, we'll see how the Spurs adjust to that. And even Wemby, after one of the games, he basically said that the Spurs need to find a way to adjust, because it's basically other teams are figuring them out, especially in those close games in the fourth quarter, like what happened on the road at Chicago and then against Denver in San Antonio. So Vegas did say that the Spurs should have gone 1-1 this past week. They ended up going 0-2. And again, the Milwaukee one, again, they shouldn't have got blown out, but at least, on paper, they were supposed to lose that game according to, just the predictions there. But the Bulls one was a big one, because the Spurs should have won that game. For one, the Bulls, they're a better team than the Bulls. They were favored there by 3 points. And then plus they led by 19 points in that game. So that, again, as far as what I've talked about here on the Spotted Pod for a few weeks, I've talked about how the Spurs have done a good job this season of taking care of business by holding on to double-digit leads, beating the teams they're supposed to beat on paper. But this Bulls example was one of those times that didn't happen, where the Bulls came back from that double-digit deficit. And then the Spurs, who were favored, they ended up losing that game. So where does their record stand as favorites? They are now 11-3, the Spurs as favorites. But 2 of those 3 losses have been to the Bulls. So again, Chicago has just been their kryptonite this season. They just have not been able to figure out the Bulls for some reason. All right, now let's go through the Spurs through 37 games this season. So again, they've only played 2 games this past week. So they are 18-19 overall for their record. So they did fall below 500. They are now 12th out west, since they haven't played in a few days. They've moved in the standings, and I do want to note that these standings were updated as of Sunday afternoon. So maybe that changes with these Sunday games that took place. Their offense, they are scoring. They're 19th in offense. That slipped from last week. They were 17th, and then also defensively, they slipped a little bit, where they are now 14th ranked defensively, right inside league average, and they were 13th last week. So again, they have taken a hit in their rankings. In crunch time, again, they lost that game close to the Bulls, and then also the previous week against the Nuggets. They are now 9-8 in crunch time, so they're starting to fall here. They were like 2nd or 3rd for most of the season, and then all of a sudden now they fall into 14th in crunch time record. At home, they're still doing okay. They're 6-4 at home in crunch time, 9th best in the league. But then it's on the road where they're really being tested right now, where they're 3-4 on the road, which is 20th in the NBA. So again, they have a lot more road games still to go the rest of the season. So that's going to be a big test for the Spurs, is can they close out these close games on the road? They did a good job a week ago at Denver, where they won on the road, but then again, they struggled against the Bulls in that close game this past week. So they are currently on a 3-game losing streak, and which matches the longest losing streak they've been on this season. They were on one earlier in early December. So again, we'll kind of see if they can end that losing streak with their game on Monday against the Lakers. All right, so now I want to go through some news and notes for the past week for the Spurs. So on Monday, January 6th, Victor Wembanyama, was a candidate or a nominee for the Western Conference Player of the Week, but he didn't win the award. But it was his 2nd nomination this season, and something I've talked about before is that Wemby continues to see his name coming up in some of these nomination lists for either Player of the Month or Weekly Player of the Month. So again, that's it, or Weekly Player of the Week, which that's a good sign for both his All-Star candidacy and also his All-NBA candidacy toward the end of the season when awards come out. Jeremy Sochan is dealing with the lower back injury again. So he missed that game against the Bucks with that same bilateral lower back tightness is what the Spurs are calling it. And then had the Spurs played the Lakers on Saturday, had that game not been postponed, Sochan was listed as questionable. So he might have made his return to the court on Saturday, but then the game got postponed. So maybe he'll come back on Monday. So now I do want to note that it is 5:23 Mountain Time when I'm recording this episode, PM. And so the Spurs haven't released their injury reports. So maybe by the time you hear this, if Sochan is available to play against the Lakers on Monday, or maybe he's still questionable going into that game on Monday. The NBA trade deadline is now 3.5 weeks away on February 6th. As far as the Spurs, as far as notable outlets, that you can usually trust their reporting, there really hasn't been any mention of the Spurs in any kind of rumors right now. So it's been pretty quiet. And then just something I've noticed, as I'm going to talk about here, is that I have written about Jonas Valanciunas, who I think would be a good fit for the Spurs. I'm going to talk about how I wrote about Cam Johnson. But as you really look at all the teams' rosters and the contract situations and things like that, it's really hard to find a lot of trade candidates this season, just because the players that are at the positions that the Spurs really need. A lot of those teams, those players are part of the other team's core rotation. It doesn't look like those teams want to move some of those players. So I really had a tough time as I've done some research, going through different rosters and stuff and looking at different contracts and percentages, stats wise. I've had a tougher time finding like a wing shooter who plays some defense, or a backup big. So again, that's where kind of just letting, just kind of, again, I'll continue to look at some other candidates. But again, it's just kind of been there's not a lot of trade candidates that kind of just pop off the page, maybe like how there were a few names last year. Let's keep going. All right, so for our first topic of this episode, I want to talk about Victor Wembanyama's All-Star path. So Wemby has two ways to get into the All-Star game. He's either going to get in as a starter or as a reserve on the Western Conference team. So this is something I wrote about on a article called the Off Day, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But I do want to give huge props to three media writers from ESPN, Brian Windhorst, Tim Bontemps, and Tim McMahon on their Hoop Collective podcast. They kind of broke this down a little bit more, and they really, provided some of the candidates for the All-Star team. And Wemby, you're going to see that he really there's going to be a place for him, whether he's starting or coming off the bench, but he's going to make his, most likely make his first All-Star selection. So regarding starting for Wemby, the last round of fan votes that came out earlier this week, he was fourth, so he's actually moved ahead of Anthony Davis. So the only three players ahead of him in fan votes were Nikola Jokic, Kevin Durant, and LeBron James. Now we do want to note that the fan vote does make up 50% of the starting five lineup. 25% is due to the media, and then 25% is also from the players. So again, that's kind of how the voting is going to go into place. And so again, Wemby needs to crack the top three in Western Conference frontcourt players to become a Western Conference All-Star starter, and those starters will be announced here in about a week and a half on January 23rd. So let's just say that the scenario happens where Victor's not able to pass Jokic, Durant, or LeBron. And so now we know that, he's probably going to come in as a reserve. Here's how that process happens. So if he's not starting, he's going to get in as a reserve. And here's why. The NBA head coaches have to pick the reserves for both the Eastern Conference and Western Conference. And there's a very deliberate format that they have to follow. They have to pick 3 Western Conference players, 2 guards, and then 2 wild cards, could be at any position. So when we talk about the candidates that are there for the front court position, there's Wemby, there's Anthony Davis, Jalen Williams from OKC, Jaren Jackson Jr., and then Alperen Şengün. So again, when we talk about those players, Victor is, clearly, showing the stats and also the eye test and also the fact that he's had the Spurs at about a 500 or better record this season. Victor's, showing that he should be among those players selected quickly. So again, he's probably one of the first names that the coaches are going to pick in the reserves list of front court players. So again, there's going to be a way that Victor gets into the All-Star game. It's looking like right now. Again, the big question more so is he going to start or is he going to come off the bench? But again, that's kind of where the All-Star path is for Victor Wembanyama. All right, for our second topic, I want to do a check-in on the Spurs' 2025 draft picks because, I know the Spurs have played 37 games right now. So again, they're almost at that halfway point of the season. And so I just kind of want to check in where their pick's supposed to land right now. And then also some of the other picks that they might get in the draft. So as we recall back to the offseason, in this upcoming draft, the 2025 draft in June, the Spurs are going to get their own pick. They're going to get the Atlanta Hawks' pick. They're also going to get Charlotte's pick if it lands 15 through 30. And they'll also get Chicago's pick if it lands 11 through 30. So again, as far as Charlotte and Chicago's picks, there are some obstacles for the Spurs to get each of their first round picks. So let's just talk about how each team's doing so far, where their projections are, and then also what does their schedule look like going forward, and where does kind of that projection show them to be. So the Spurs, as I mentioned, are 18-19 so far this season. Right now, if the season ended today, their pick would be projected to land 10th in the lottery. If the Spurs end up getting into the playoffs, though, as they've been hovering around that area, at one point they were like 8th in the standings. If that happens, let's just say the Spurs are more successful down the road and they end up becoming a playoff team, well, then their pick will end up not being in the lottery. And then one thing to note, though, about why that's kind of challenging to get into the playoffs for the Spurs is that they do have the 5th hardest schedule left amongst all NBA teams, according to positiveresidual.com. So again, the Spurs' schedule is going to get a lot tougher, as I explained in last week's episode. And so that's just an example there of if they can't get into the playoffs, well, then they're going to end up with the lottery pick. But right now, it would project to be 10th, their own pick. The Atlanta Hawks right now, they're similar to the Spurs, where they're very competitive. They're kind of sniffing around that play-in playoff picture out in the Eastern Conference. So right now they are 19-19 is their record as of Sunday afternoon. So their pick is projected to land 13th. And again, similar to the Spurs, where if the Hawks end up getting into the playoffs, then it does not become a lottery pick. It's going to be outside the lottery. But if they don't, well, then that has a good chance of being in the lottery. So again, the Spurs will get the Hawks' pick regardless of where it finished. They're going to get Atlanta's pick. And then regarding the Hawks, they have a better chance of getting into the playoffs because they do have not really an easier schedule, but they have the 13th easiest schedule, which again, 13th is almost like league average. So again, the Hawks at least have an easier path to becoming a playoff team maybe than what the Spurs do. The Bulls are currently 18-20. Their pick's projected to go 9th right now, or land 9th, which would mean that it would not go to the Spurs. But again, being 18-20, Chicago's kind of right there in that play-in mix as well. I mean, they've actually done better too than maybe they're supposed to, and maybe their front office isn't really happy with them, playing so well, because they're going to mess up their chance of keeping that pick. It's going to end up going to San Antonio if they ended up becoming like a playoff level team. And if as long as it lands 11 through 30, San Antonio gets to keep the pick. So the Bulls, like I mentioned, are playing better than expected. This pick does have a good chance of landing to the Spurs right now. So I am interested to see if by the trade deadline, if the Bulls make a number of rotation moves or to find trades to move some of the rotation players like Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic. We'll see how much Chicago really, really wants to hold on to that pick, depending on what kind of moves they make here at the trade deadline. Because again, if they keep all these players on the court and they stay relatively healthy, the Bulls are a pretty good team out in the Eastern Conference, at least, sniffing around that play-in range, which is going to, mean not so good of a case for them keeping their own pick. It's going to end up going to the Spurs. And also the schedule doesn't help Chicago in helping their pick because, according to Positive Residual, the Bulls do have the 10th easiest schedule left in the league. So again, they're going to have some winnable games going forward as the year finishes out. And the last team that the Spurs have an opportunity to get their pick is the Charlotte Hornets. So the Hornets, though, right now, the way they're playing, they're not going to let the Spurs have their pick. So they are currently 8-27 as of Sunday afternoon, which projects them to have the 4th pick in the lottery. And again, if the Spurs, if this pick does not end up in the Spurs' hands, which right now it does not look like it's going to be, because again, it has to land 15 through 30. It's probably going to land 4, top 5 somewhere. Then it's going to become a 2nd round pick next year as of 2026, because it's been going like this for a few years now, where if it doesn't land in the top 10, then Charlotte keeps the pick, and then all of a sudden now we're getting to that last requirement where if it's not in the in that range 15 through 30 this year, well, then next year that Charlotte pick turns into a 2026 2nd round pick. So again, that's probably where it's headed right now. It looks like the Spurs are going to end up just getting a 2026 2nd round pick from Charlotte instead of it being a 1st round pick this coming season. The Hornets, though, do have an easier schedule as well. They have the 9th easiest schedule according to Positive Residual, but again, they haven't really been that good this year. They've only won 8 games so far, and so again, I think Charlotte's going to end up just being a bad team and ending up keeping, which is good for them because they're going to get to keep their pick. It looks like it's not going to end up in the Spurs' hands, and it's going to become a 2026 2nd rounder most likely. So again, that's just a quick update on where the Spurs' pick situation stands. So right now, based on where everything's at, they're for sure getting their own pick and the Hawks' pick, but then also there's a pretty good chance they could get the Bulls' pick because Chicago is playing better basketball than maybe expected. All right, so for our 3rd topic of this episode, I want to talk about Devin Vassell, who's having a tough time shooting the basketball since Christmas. So I like to use Cleaning the Glasses game score, and what you do is you pick up the player's name, and it kind of has like a little chart, like a timeline basically, and you can kind of see when a player kind of starts tailing off or having some trouble. And so Vassell's really starts around that Christmas game against the Knicks back on December 25th. So that's basically his last 8 games. These are where some of these stats are coming from. So in the last 8 games, Vassell's averaging 13.8 points on 15.3 shot attempts. So again, more more shots than points. He's only making 36% of his shots from the floor. He's launching 6 3-point attempts. So again, a high volume 3-point shooter, but only making 25% of his threes during this time frame. He's averaging 1.8 free throws and making 71% of his free throws attempts. He is crushing the glass a little bit better, 5.8 rebounds right now, 4.1 assists to 1.9 turnovers, setting up his teammates, and then 1.5 steals there on the defensive end. Now, what I also do with Cleaning the Glasses data is I kind of just looked at Vassell's numbers overall. This isn't just these 8 games. This is just this whole season as a whole compared to his previous years, back from his rookie year, even like last year and all the other years. So as far as his usage, it's pretty similar to last season. It's not like he's losing shot attempts or free throw attempts or assists. Basically, that's what usage kind of calculates there. So again, he's having his involvement still in the offense. Also, his frequency, when we look at his frequency, where his shots come from, a lot of them are also in the same areas. So again, his percentage of shots are still coming from some of the same areas, the mid-range, the 3, sometimes getting to the rim as well. But when we look at his accuracy, his shot making, this is where the issue is. He's really struggling almost everywhere across the floor, whether inside, middle, or outside, except for 2 areas that he's shooting better than last year. That's the long mid-range, which is after like 14 feet within the 3-point line. And also the corner 3, he's still shooting well. But the problem there is that he doesn't really take a lot of corner 3s. He doesn't get that many corner looks. And so a lot of his 3s have to be taken from the above the break 3. But that's an area where he's really struggling. He's only making 30% of his arc 3s, according to Cleaning the Glass, which would be for him a career low. So again, he's having a really tough time really finding his 3 ball is what it looks like here. And then also, when we look at his on-off splits, when he's out there on the court, he's having his worst season as well, and this data as well. Normally, for his career, he has like a few seasons where he's like the Spurs are basically like a few points better with him on the floor, or they're just barely a few points worse, according to the data. And again, he was on a lot of bad teams, obviously, when they were only winning like 22 games and things like that. In the last few years, they've been a rebuilding team. But this season, the Spurs are a minus 14.5 points per 100 with Vassell on the floor, which is in the 4th percentile. Again, that's a huge outlier compared to his other seasons, even since his rookie season. Again, they've always either been better, slightly better, or slightly worse, according to this data. But again, right now, minus 14.5 is a huge number there. Again, 4th percentile is a little concerning. And then as far as what's going on here, when we look at that data, that minus 14.5, here's why. When Vassell's on the floor so far this season, the Spurs are scoring 6.6 fewer points per 100, which is in the 14th percentile. And then on defense, they're giving up 8 more points per 100 when he's on the floor, which is in the 7th percentile. So again, right now it's looking like a huge outlier so far this season compared to all of his other seasons. So we'll see. I mean, that's a big dramatic one again, minus 14.5. So we'll see if this is just a shooting slump or what's going on here with him. As far as Spurs acting head coach Mitch Johnson, he was asked about Vassell, and the slump that he's kind of going through right now after that loss to the Bucks. And here's what Mitch Johnson said. He basically said that Vassell's going through some rough patches. I'll read you the full quote. He says, Devin is a heck of a shooter and a scorer, and I think it's one of those deals where the worm will turn, as Pop will say, always says, and so you're just waiting for it, said Coach Johnson of Vassell. He shot a lot of good shots, and I think he'll make them. The only time I really get mad at him is when he hesitates or doesn't shoot. That's one thing we can't do. We're a good shooting team. He just has to sustain the confidence even with the rough patches. So again, this is Coach Johnson basically saying that, the Spurs are letting Vassell kind of work through his shooting slump right now, trying to figure out, can he get in a rhythm, giving him those games. They want to keep his confidence up, obviously, by encouraging him to keep shooting even when he's struggling out there on the floor. But again, this is just Coach Johnson now acknowledging that, yes, Devin is kind of going through a shooting slump, but going through those rough patches there, as he says. So again, we'll kind of see if Vassell can kind of pick up his shooting percentages. And again, I really think it's at above the breakthrough where he's really struggling right now. And you actually see him being more aggressive trying to go inside because obviously his jump shot isn't falling as much. And as far as, would the Spurs look at making him a lineup change? I don't think they would right now, just because, again, you kind of they have to let him find his rhythm because, again, he's there right now for this season. He's their highest paid player at $29 million he's making. You can't have your highest paid player coming off the bench or else things right now are not going in the right direction. And then one thing we want to note is that this hasn't been a normal season for Vassell because of that injury he came into the season with, where he missed all of training camp. he didn't start playing basketball again on the court, or actually in games until early November. But then even when he came out for like the first month, he was on a minutes restriction, and then also he couldn't like play him back to back. So for him, and he was coming off the bench. So for him, it's been like it hasn't been like his usual seasons have gone along, his progress. So again, that's something that we do on account as far as why he's having such a inconsistent season so far, and why he's going through a slump here is that yes, he part of it is just the return from injury really has maybe messed things up as far as his way to get back into rhythm, kind of get back into a groove out there on the court. So again, I think the Spurs are going to continue to try to let him kind of find his way, kind of find his shot, especially find that rhythm. But, after a while, if it's still not coming together for Vassell, they do have to maybe look at a lineup change down the line here with 3 or 4 more seasons left, three or four more months left in the season. And so there's obviously an option there, and that's Julian Champagnie, who was starting a place in Vassell's place as Vassell was returning from injury. And obviously we know what Champagnie's going to bring to the court on offense. He's going to bring a high volume 3-point shooting. Plus he's more accurate right now. He and Harrison Barnes are the Spurs' 2 best 3-point shooters out there, providing spacing for Wemby. And then also, we do know too that Champagnie is a better wing defender. So again, I'm not saying they're gonna move Vassell to the bench right now, but I am saying after a while, if things kind of don't come together where he doesn't figure out his rhythm or get out of the slump, then the Spurs do have to look at possibly a lineup change at some point. I'm not saying right now. All right, if you have a chance, make sure to visit the spotupshot.com. I have a lot of different features from this past week up there. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the players, as I've been looking for trade candidates who maybe could fit with the Spurs, one of the players who's really caught my eye here is Cameron Johnson of the Brooklyn Nets. So I wrote a 2-part series on him. So in part 1, I basically looked at all of his stats and I plugged in different film clips. And basically what he's going to bring any team that trades for him is he's going to bring out lights out shooting right now, very high volume shooting, highly accurate shooting as well from all over the floor. He mainly plays the 3 and the 4 right now with Brooklyn. And then defensively, he has active hands and some size. But, again, if you're trading for Cam Johnson, you're not trading for his defense. You're more so trading for what he's going to bring you on the offensive end of the floor. So, again, in part 1, all I do is I really focus on his stats, kind of how he's been playing so far with Brooklyn this season. I clipped some different film clips together as well. So that's part 1. Then I wrote Cam Johnson part 2. And in this segment here, or in this piece, I am looking at his contract, trade rumors, questions that, like what do the Nets want for him in a trade? And then I looked at would he be a good fit for the Spurs, and should the Spurs go after him? And I put some different trade packages together in that piece. And so obviously, Johnson's on a good contract. He's only making $22.5 million this season, $20.5 million next season, and then $22.5 million in his third year. He'll only be 31 by the time year 3 ends of his contract. So again, for what he's going to bring a team, lights out, reliable outside shooting, he's on a good contract there. One thing I did note, though, this doesn't apply to the Spurs, but other teams, though, those apron teams, they have a tougher time creating a trade for Johnson, because when they work on a trade for him, he's not coming in at $22.5 million on their books. He's coming in at $27 million on their books. So again, I kind of wrote about some apron teams who have interest in him, and just kind of how creating trades is a lot more difficult for them. Now, luckily for the Spurs, if they had interest, they could operate with that $22.5 million number, and they have some contracts there that could work in that range. And then something I noticed that there's been like 4 or 5 teams that have had reported interest in Cam Johnson. The Spurs have not been one of those teams, though, I do want to say, so far, according to the rumor mill. So again, I kind of mentioned some of that in there. Now, as far as what the Nets want, according to different reporting, Brooklyn does want more than 1 first-round pick. So again, so maybe 2, 3, I don't know how many they want, but they definitely want more than 1 first-round pick, according to the reporting. And they're not desperate to move Cam Johnson. Basically, if they don't find a deal up until this trade deadline that suits them, they're not going to be overly aggressive and say, we just got to get rid of him. No, they'll hold on to him, according to the reporting, and just finish out the season. And then in the offseason in July, teams are obviously still going to want him because of what he brings to your team. And so they'll start looking at different trades possibly in the offseason. So again, that's kind of what the Nets are looking for. From a team that trades for Cam Johnson. And then just to sum up the Spurs' part, yes, obviously I do think that he'd be a great fit for the Spurs. He's going to bring one of the issues that they have right now, which is players that aren't able to make outside open shots right now, catch and shoot threes especially. Cam's going to bring that to the team. As far as contracts that could work to get him on the Spurs, contracts that work really well are either Keldon Johnson's deal, Zach Collins' deal, or Harrison Barnes's. I said that if the Spurs were to make a trade with Cam Johnson, I think that Brooklyn would likely want Keldon Johnson back out of those three options. And then I think the real issue, as far as if the Spurs don't make a trade for Cam Johnson, if they have interest, is the fact that the Nets want more than one first-round pick. I think that for the Spurs, if it's more than one first-round pick, it's going to be tough for them to give like 2 or 3 picks away, first-round picks. And so I think that's where they probably just walk away from the negotiating table. So again, there's no actual reporting that the Spurs have interest in Cam Johnson, but I just think, looking at different trade candidates out there, I do think he would be a really good fit for San Antonio. And again, I look at different trade packages and things like that and answer all those different questions there in that piece called Cam Johnson Part 2. And the last feature I wrote this past week was called The Off Day. It talks about Wemby's All-Star path, which I talked about a while ago. The Spurs on catch and shoot threes, their rotation players shooting catch and shoot threes, and then some synergy data that was kind of impressive regarding Wemby and Jeremy Sochan guarding the pick and roll on defense. So in terms of that catch and shoot three shooting from the rotation players, one thing I want to know when I ran the data was that basically everyone of the rotation players is shooting below 33% on catch and shoot threes, which is basically not even a point per shot, except for 3 players. Harrison Barnes, Julian Champagnie, and Wemby. And the problem there is that if Wemby's one of your best catch and shoot 3-point shooters, that's a problem because he's usually the guy creating catch and shoot threes for you, because he's usually the one seeing the double teams that teams are kind of scheming to try to get the ball out of his hands. So when he kicks out, when Victor has the ball and he has to kick out and maybe to an open shooter or to the next player, and then that player moves it to the open shooter, that's a problem. The fact that mostly everyone in the rotation is shooting below 33% on catch and shoot threes. So again, that's part of why I said, like, the last 3 games where they've lost, it really looks like teams are starting to now really cramp the spacing within the inside and making it tougher on Victor to kind of get going and find his matchups. And so again, that's just what it is on paper. I mean, again, Barnes, Champagnie, and Wemby are the 3 highest shooting catch and shoot 3-point shooters, most reliable, should I say, at least all shooting, I think 37% or above on catch and shoot threes. And then also in that piece, like I mentioned, I just have some numbers from Synergy just showing that Wemby's above league average defensively guarding the pick and roll ball handlers when he has to switch on to guards or forwards. But then when he has to switch onto the roll man, the other bigs involved in the action, he's elite. I mean, just 99th percentile guarding the pick and roll. So it just shows that no matter what kind of schemes an offense tries to run against Wemby guarding the pick and roll, as long as he's involved, it's usually a problem for the opposing team. And then I also talked about how Sochan shows his versatility because in his data as well, he's like in the 60th or 63rd percentile of guarding the pick and roll ball handler, being able to switch onto the smaller guards or forwards. And so Sochan has some good data as well on there. All right, so now before I close out this episode, let's review the Spurs' next 4 games before I record another episode on next Monday. I believe that's January 20th. Next Monday. So, like I said, that they are going to go forward with the game against the Lakers on Monday. So they're at LA. Originally, had this first postponement not happened, I was going to say the Spurs lose on Saturday and then win on Monday. That was my original prediction. But now that the Lakers, a more veteran team with a lot of older players on their roster, now that they've had a few more days off, I think this is going to help them, have a lot more energy coming out in this game against the Spurs. So I'm going to end them. Plus, they're at home. So I'm going to go with the Lakers in this first game on Monday. Then on Wednesday and Friday, the Spurs are back home in San Antonio. They have a split with the Memphis Grizzlies, both in San Antonio. So I'm just gonna split this one. I don't know if I'm gonna say Grizzlies win Wednesday and then Spurs win Friday, or maybe it goes reverse. Maybe Spurs win Wednesday and then the Grizzlies win on Friday. So again, I think they'll go 1-1 as far as those 2 games against Memphis. And then on Sunday, the Spurs are back on the road at Miami to play the Heat. Now, obviously, we know the Heat are in a situation right now where Jimmy Butler wants out. So, again, they're kind of having to figure that out as a team. But I'm still going to go with the Heat just because, again, the Spurs have been having a lot of trouble on the road. That hasn't been their place where they've been as successful this season. And so, again, I'm going to go with Miami on that game as well. So, again, we'll kind of see how the Spurs do in these next 4 games. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spotted Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spotted Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening and have a great day.